time out, Mike? So, do you remember that MasterCard commercial where all the objects are mentioned with a price tag and then this unquantifiable or relational thing is mentioned as priceless? You know, it's like tickets to the ball game, $125, hot dogs, $20, popcorn, $10, time with your son, priceless. Remember those commercials, right? They did a good marketing strategy with that. But anyways, I think there are many truths about God and the provisions that He makes for us that are truly priceless. Or maybe better put, are priceless for us only because Jesus has paid the price. Well, I think one of those priceless things are right before us here in our study of Romans 8 and verse 28. Romans 8:28 is one of those verses that stand alone as a promise and an assurance for us independent of its context. You know, I think certain verses we hear, like all the truth that is really important is contained right there. You know, do not be anxious about anything, but by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your request to God. And the peace of God, which transcends your heart, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. You take those verses independent of your knowledge of Philippians 4, and those are useful to you in the same way when it comes to Romans 8:28. But in spite of that, what I've said, I think when we know it in its context, it's even more powerful. And basically, I think the significance of this verse is so valuable is that really just about every word in the verse is significant. So let's break it down and see what nuggets of truth that we find here. So Romans 8:28, I'm not sure if we'll go any further than what we have here. And we know that in all things God works for the good for those who love Him, who have been called according to His purpose. And so naturally, just keep that verse right up there, because like I said, we'll pretty much go word for word, and it starts with the word and. That word is important, these little conjunctions that we might otherwise ignore, and to recognize that the word that Paul uses here is and. It's a connecting word. It's a word that shows that what is following, in terms of what he has said before, is just flowing with that. I mean, it's not therefore. You know, oftentimes when Paul is making transitions, he'll use therefore in terms of the thing that is following it's an implication of what came before. Or we'll use the word but, and it's going in a different direction, an alternate truth, or something that balances what he has said before. But this is an and. So again, it's along with everything that he said. And I think what's significant about that is we know where we have been in this section in Romans 8. And basically, Paul has just gotten through telling us about the hope and the presence that is ours because of the work of God in our lives. I mean, basically, we look at the groaning. Remember the groaning of creation, our own groaning. You know, we recognize our brokenness and the brokenness of the world. But in the context of that, God gives us hope. That there's a hope of redemption, that God's going to fix it all. That's a future thing that, again, we project hope on that makes a difference today, but it's still something that God will accomplish in the future. But then he also talks about the Spirit groaning with us, the presence of God helping us with our weakness. And so again, when you think about the hope and the presence that he just talked about, and then from there to say, and along with that, so we have the surety of the future and hope, and we have the confidence and presence of God as we deal with our weakness. Well, what about circumstances? What about the events of life? And I think that's what Romans 8:28 deals with. And all the things that God is providing as you deal with trials and tribulations and difficulties and suffering and weakness, all the things that are part of life, okay, it's hope, it's presence, and you know something? God is working. And so again, that and is very significant. Another thing not to miss in this whole context is to recognize the work of the Trinity. That when you talk about redemption, when you think about redemption, what do you think about? You think about the work of Christ, right? What Jesus accomplished and how that redemption will be ultimately fulfilled and expressed in more concrete ways in the future. But again, based on the work of Christ. And then the Spirit comes and he ministers in our weakness, right? And now, in Romans 8:28, we have God. God the sovereign, God the Father who is orchestrating things on our behalf. So I think all those things can kind of be pressed into this little word and. The next word is we. Again, that this isn't a promise, this isn't a circumstance, promise to me or to Paul. He doesn't say I, he doesn't say you, like you're a special person that this is directed to. That basically this is something we all know. It's something we're all conscious of. It's something that is available to all of us. Now, we are going to see that there are caveats here. There are conditions in terms of both, I think, God's activity as well as our awareness of his activity. But it is a we. That is something that God is offering us in terms of what he's doing in our lives. And to know that in the we of us knowing this, we're encouraged. We're mutually encouraged by that. Like in other words, when we're going through circumstances that are troublesome, and we might need this promise, we might need this awareness, we can all speak into each other's lives. Hey, brother, remember, we know that God is working all things together for the good. Hey, sister, we know God is, it's so we. And then we actually have the word that we know. We know this. Now, what is interesting is that the word that Paul uses for know is the word oida as opposed to gnosko. And you know exactly what I'm talking about when I use those words, right? Absolutely not. But basically, gnosko is really a more common word that's used for knowing and knowledge. It actually talks about knowledge that you learn and you develop. That by experience, by teaching, you know things. But this is oida that actually comes from the verb that has to do with seeing. It's also used in the word of seeing things. But when you see things, you then know things, right? Like when you observe things, that word seeing, in its etymology, not etymology of what it is, its development as a word became about knowledge, what you know. And so therefore, this knowledge that Paul is talking about is an intrinsic knowledge. It's a knowledge that's just about as you observe things, as you engage with the world, as you observe creation. It's not something you grow in, it's not something you educate yourself in, it's just there. It's so obvious that God is doing this, we just know it. And that's what he is saying there. Now, it is interesting to me that Paul uses the word know as opposed to believe or hope. Paul has been talking about faith all through the book of Romans. Why not say we believe that God does such and such? He just came from the context of talking about hope. We hope that God, this confident expectation that God will do this and do such and such. But he doesn't use those words. He uses the words, we know this. And when you think about the difference between believing something, hoping for something, and knowing something, isn't knowledge more substantive? Isn't knowledge something we're more grounded in? Isn't knowledge, again, that's something more automatic for us? Like when we know things, we don't need to believe it because we know it. It's something that's well defined and well established in us, and that's kind of what Paul is talking about. He's talking about the knowledge that we have of, again, all of God's activity in terms of just how he is and how he orchestrates things and how he conducts the world. So we know that, and then the next word is all things. It is actually one word in the Greek, but it is all things, everything. It's not some things, it's not most things, but it is all things. So again, think about what the verse says, and we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. And so therefore, how many things fit into this verse? How many things apply to all things? Well, it's all, right? It's everything. Now, it's not everyone. I'd say it's an important distinction. He's not saying every person will be good. People won't. But about things, circumstances, situations, consequences, discipline, life in general, all things. Like, there's nothing that we will go through that doesn't fit into this verse, right? And again, if Paul is using the word all, he means all. There are other words he could have used, but he said all things are working together for the good for those who love God and call to his purpose. And so again, we won't find any situation that we're in. And we're talking about tragic things. We're talking about difficult things. See, if you're saying all things, think about the things you've been through. Think about the things your friends have been through, your neighbors have been through, the country has been through. All things. You know, again, we know that. We know that in terms of who God is and how he conducts himself. But again, that's what it's referring to. That it's bad things, good things, it's all things. And then we move on to the next word where it works. And we know that in all things God works. The better translation for this word is works together. The Greek word is actually the word that we get synergy from. And so when you think about synergy, you think about things working together to accomplish a common thing. Even things that are disparate and that are different from each other, coming together synergistically to do something good and produce something. And that is the concept that is here. To me, when you talk about, again, and we know that in all things God works together, that there's effort here, there's work, there's strategy, there's intentionality, that God is doing something behind the scenes. I think it's also to recognize that it is together. All things individually will not be good, but when mixed together, they will work towards what is good. Now, naturally, when you're in a strange place, oftentimes you pull out your GPS, right? And you get the map, and you know where you're going, and so on and so forth. Well, I'm not sure if, when you are visiting a place and you are going to the same place, you're going to a certain hotel, we're going to a hospice center to visit my sister. Well, we got used to the roads that we're going down. And so it got to a point where we really didn't need the GPS anymore. One morning we're picking up something on the way there, and all of a sudden the GPS is, leading us down places we haven't been before. And we're in this neighborhood, and we're in Alabama, and it's got all these Civil War battle names: Wilderness Road, Sharpsburg Drive, Antietam Lane. So it's like, okay, am I safe in this neighborhood? Oh, I've got a Florida plate on my car, so that's good. But anyways, but we don't know. I'm not sure if you've ever been disillusioned by your GPS. Like your GPS is telling you you're coming to this place, and then you come to an end of the road. You've arrived, and it's a dirt road. What? How can I arrive? But then on the other hand, when you think about how that's a great picture of how God is orchestrating things, I'm taking the lefts and I'm driving down. I don't know where I'm going. I'm hoping the GPS is going to be consistent and bring me to the place that I want to be. But we can know with ultimate confidence in God, as he is leading us, as we take these rights and these lefts, we go into places that, boy, this doesn't seem like God would be leading me to say here. It doesn't seem like it would make sense that it would be doing this thing. But you know something? When everything works together, that's where the good is found. That's where the work of God is. And then all of a sudden, when you get to your destination, you realize, hey, you know something? All those things that I went through were absolutely consistent with going from here to there. Maybe the analogy for life is, when we think about the good that God is trying to press into our lives, what position have we placed ourselves to get to a certain point that God has for us? If in God's purpose and plan, he has this for us, and if we went from here to there, maybe that would be a straight road. But we make decisions, we bear consequences, we do things in terms of we come over here. Now all of a sudden the good that God is trying to produce. So, you're going to take a lot of lefts and rights. You're going to go through some 25 mile an hour areas rather than 50 mile an hour, 70 mile an hour areas in terms of getting there. But God is he's still pressing this good. He's still trying to work things together to make it all happen. And God is, again, he's the one that's engaged. I think we will be participating, That's certainly the importance of our choice in terms of following God as He's working, but just to realize behind the scenes that we don't necessarily have to know the next step. We don't have to necessarily know what's 3 turns from here. No, what's the next turn? Where's the next step to go? And to believe and to know that God is orchestrating things. So I think in the work that God is doing together to bring us to the good, like we have our part, we have to make our choices to participate with Him, but only to what extent He makes that evident to us in terms of our participation with it. And so therefore, again, and we know that in all things God works together for the good of those who love Him, but we have to just stay on for the good. It's important to recognize, you may have heard this before, but it doesn't say that all things are good, but all things work toward the good. I think this is God pressing His goodness into our lives. I think this is God pressing His goodness into a world that is evil. You know, I think when we think about how impressive this is, for God to make this promise and naturally accomplish it, how challenging that is. See, it wouldn't be really impressive if you said, you know something, I can make good out of good things. You know, you give me a birthday cake, you give me some presents, you give me some decorations, I can make that party happen. All good things, just put it together. Oh, isn't it even better? Isn't it good? But how about you've got bad things? You've got contradictory things. You've got suffering. You've got to get all these different things that come in the mix. And for God to say, I work all those things together for good. What a greater statement of His goodness. What a greater statement of His sovereignty. That again, He doesn't need good things to make good things. He can take bad things and make them into the good. Again, they don't become, bad things don't become good things, but they do become useful things or purposeful things that's used for the good in terms of what God is promoting. I think it's also important to understand that the good that is being talked about here is His good. It's not our good necessarily. It's not about our comfort. It's not about our popularity. It's not about our prosperity. It's not about our success. It's not about our good health. You know, we can't press our perception or our desire for good in the verse and say, we all know, we know that in all things God works for the good. Oh yeah, well, that's good for me. You know, as far as, I love how people take, Psalm 37:4, where delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart. So again, you see that verse in the flesh, you say, what? I delight myself in the Lord, and I get what I want? Well, where do I sign up? How do I delight myself in the Lord? If He gives me the desires of my heart? No, what it's saying is if you delight yourself in the Lord, He'll tell you what you want. Like He'll give you what you should desire. And then when you have the things that you should desire, then He'll give them to you. That's the promise there. And the same thing here, that when He's talking about the good that is being pressed in, or God is accomplishing, it's His good. Now sometimes His good is blessing. Sometimes it is prosperity. Sometimes it is good health. But there's no guarantee of that. We've got too much of an example, a paradigm in Scripture where suffering is good and that God can accomplish great things, and we share in the sufferings of Christ. And for those who are mature, they would actually see that as a badge of honor. You mean I get to suffer with Jesus? You remember when Peter and John, were in prison, they came back and they were rejoicing with the other disciples. We got to be in prison. We suffered for Jesus' name. And they were ramped up. Not because good things happened to them, but because a bad thing happened, but it was a good purpose that God was accomplishing and what they were identifying with. And so again, it's not the good that we think of, but it is the good that God understands as being good, that is intrinsically good, that is good according to His economy and His will. Now, it is unfortunate that people oftentimes stop here. You'll hear unbelievers, well, all things work together for the good. Yeah, and and that's where it ends. Sometimes believers do that. Oh, we're in Romans 8:28. All things work together for the good. And then they just march along. And so you can't take the first part of the verse without recognizing the second part of the verse. And that's where we move on to this phrase of those who love him. So again, this is the first caveat. This is the first condition in terms of, okay, I mean, it's a great thing. Like if you just took that first part and said, Lord, we know that in all things God works for the good. Yeah, that's something to memorize. That's something to remember. That's something to encourage my heart. But then just remember that for those who love, it's not to everyone. This is not God just sprinkling goodness all over the world. Now, I think God does that. There is something called his general grace that I think, the rain falls on the just and the unjust. The unbelievers' plants grow just like your plants grow. And so there is this general grace that God extends to the world. But in terms of this goodness, in terms of God orchestrating things to bring it about where, again, the good is accomplished, it is to those who love him. Now, it is important to note in the Greek that this phrase is actually more forward in the sentence. When you look at the Greek itself, it actually says, and we know that to those who love God, all things work together for the good. So actually, this phrase is even emphasized more so. That before the good is even talked about in the Greek, it's for those who love God. It's for those who have a relationship with him. See, I think receiving the good and even understanding what the good even is starts with knowing and loving God. See, as I said before, you might not have gotten it, but when you see it here, you might understand what I'm talking about. Again, when you have this caveat, you have this condition, I think it's a condition of what you receive. That again, if you're not loving God, then you won't receive the good. God will not work things together for good. In fact, you could probably find a scripture that God will frustrate the work of evil. God will frustrate evil to even in our own lives to draw us back to him. But I think there's also an aspect of this that if you're not loving God, you won't even be able to see the good that he's orchestrating. So on one hand, it's about what you receive. It's another thing about what you perceive and what you understand about what God is doing. I mean, to realize that what God is calling us to is to love him. That God wants all that he is striving for in our lives, what we're pressing in, what we're seeking to accomplish is love me. We saw that in Deuteronomy, in the Old Testament. Remember that? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul. I mean, yeah, there are verses in the Bible that talk about fearing the Lord as the beginning of wisdom, and you need to obey, you need to submit, I am the authority. But to recognize that more significantly and more often, God is calling us, love me. I love you. You love me. We're a happy family. I didn't mean to go to a party. But anyway, but it's well, in God's economy, it kind of gets that. But that is God. Like, I am loving you to show that my primary heartbeat to you is love. That all that I'm doing, even in obedience and instruction and authority, is about the fact that I love you, I'm protecting you, I'm caring for you. And so now for me to fulfill the utmost purpose in your life, what am I asking you to do? Love me back. To think about how much do we care about God? How much are we intentional about loving him? How much are we thinking about intimacy and relationship, longing, connectedness, affinity, caring? That's what to those who love him. That again, that are trying to grow in your life to love God. And again, we only love him because he first loved us. We would never even have the awareness to initiate love to God outside of God loving us. But that is what God calls us to. Now, you all do know how to love God, right? Because you know John 14:21, right? So why don't you bring that up, Mike, so just for those who might not know John 14:21, can see it. Okay, I'll read it. 14:21 says this, "Whoever has my commands and obeys them, he is the one who loves me. And he who loves me will be loved by my Father, and I too will love him and show myself to him. So whoever has my commands and keeps them is the one who loves me." So how do you show love to God? You obey his commandments. Now, understand that the reason why that's the case, again, this is not God saying, you know something, I just have to be right, and you have to make sure you know you're wrong, and I just want... It's the reality of who God is. Like, God knows the best. He knows that what he thinks is right, and what he desires for us, and he wills for us, is true. And so therefore, him to say, the best way for you to love me is to follow my commands, because to love me and not follow my commands shows you really don't know me at all. Like, you can't know God and then not obey him. Because to not obey him is to not know him. Because if you know God in the authority that he is, and the truth that he is, and the love that he is, the most natural thing we would do is obey him. And so that's why obedience is connected to love. You know, we would never say this to our husbands or wives, right? You know something? If you love me, you'll obey my commands. You may try that. I don't think it'll work very well at home. But see, God can get away with this because of who he is. And the heartbeat behind it, again, is this loving, compassionate, merciful, gracious, powerful, sovereign, authoritative God that says, you know something? But still love me. Engage in relationship with me. Don't think of it as me pointing the finger at you, but lovingly cupping you in my hand and saying, let me build you up, let me show you why I'm commanding you this, why I'm calling you to obey. But it's all in that context of, again, those who love him, those who are engaged with God in that way in terms of obeying his commands. And see, to me it makes sense now that if that's the first caveat, you know, that you know, when we know that, you know, God, in all things God will work together for the good for those who love him, well, that will make sense. You see, not only based on what we would receive, you know, what is God free to do? I'm free to give, I'm free to orchestrate, I'm free to work things together for those who love me, and so therefore it's going to lead to good things for them. But I think the other side of it is we'll be able to see it. We'll be able to notice it. We'll be looking for it. You know, at the end of this, looking at this verse, I'll talk about, I think, what does this make us? What kind of people does this make us? And I think one thing it makes us is aware. It makes us expectant. Like almost, boy, God, this is a mess. How are you going to bring good out of this? That's what this verse allows us to think, challenge God with. You know, but God, it's not that angry. How are you going to make a mess out of this? But God, I'm excited. Like, what's tomorrow going to bring? I just lost my job. Like, you know, not because I was a poor employee. I didn't cheat. I didn't, steal. I just lost my job just because I was working. Well, what's the good? You know, God, how are you going to work good out of this? I can't see a way. I can't see how this can work. But God, I think what we do, you know, we do our work, we do what God gives us to do, but then we just pray, God, show me that good. What is it like? God, protect me from doing things that would not love you. Protecting me from doing things that would mess up your plan. But otherwise, I can wait expectantly about how are you going to work this out. But day in and day out, what am I doing? I'm growing in my relationship with God. Remember those 5 things: worship, the Word, prayer, the Spirit, the fellowship of believers. If you want a concrete expression of how do I love God, how do I obey his commandments, do those things. That's at least where you start. Now, I think things flow from that. You read the Word, you become more obedient, you become more pure, you become more honest. Yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be. But it starts, you want to obey God, worship him, be in the Word, be in prayer, be in the Spirit, and be with believers. and you're going to find your life transformed. You're going to find intent and purpose and desire for God growing, and then all of a sudden when he's working, oh, I see, boy, if this hadn't happened to me, I would never be in the unemployment line talking to this person about Jesus. If this didn't happen to me, I probably wouldn't be praying as much as I'm praying now. You know, all the good that God is trying to accomplish through that. But as we love him, not only do we free God to open the door so we can receive it, but I think there's also an aspect that we're open to perceive it. That really brings us back to the second caveat, that the second condition that is here, that it is not only those who love him, but who love him who have been called according to his purpose. And so this is the other side of that. You know, there's part of what love is that is about relationship. Again, it's about engaging with me personally and who I am and who you are. But then to know that is, again, when you engage with God, the God of the universe, you know that he has a will. You know that he has a plan. You know that he has directionality. You know that he's seeking to accomplish something for us, to us, with us, through us, in terms of how we operate in our lives. Both for ourselves, our families, our community, our neighbors, our co-workers, all that. And so therefore, when we think about, again, this caveat, it makes sense in terms of just the flow of all God's activity, what he's orchestrating, the things he's working together. Then it would make sense that if we're called to his purpose, see, not only engage in relationship, not only do we love him, but God, when you're moving, when all of a sudden you do give me an opportunity to be in the unemployment line and I'm sharing the gospel with someone, I don't know that there's anything more important that I could be doing. You think of God's economy. Now, I don't quit my job necessarily so I can be in the unemployment line. But again, we find ourselves in circumstances, my sister's in the hospital, and all of a sudden, glorifying Jesus, singing songs, singing worship, speaking of heaven, speaking of good things, when the person down the hall is complaining and bitter and angry and dysfunctional. Well, what does that do? That would never happen if I wasn't here. So again, when we're called to his purpose, when we recognize his purpose is really is for Jesus to be glorified, for him, for God to be glorified, for the gospel to be known, and for me to be made like him. That's really God's purpose. That's what God is trying to accomplish. So there's probably lots of ways that God could do that. There's probably lots of ways, lots of roads. Again, going back to that GPS. No, don't turn here. No, it's not the 70-mile-an-hour highway just cruising along. No, it's going to be rights and lefts. You're going to enjoy the scenery. Seeing some nice homes in Birmingham, and someone said, no, you're not going to go that way, you're going to go this way, but you're going to be better for it in terms of whatever God is accomplishing. And again, when we're not focused on me, again, my success, my popularity, my prosperity, my health, whatever, and we're in God, I want to love you in relationship, I want to be used for how you would use me for, it just completely changes your orientation. Completely changes, what am I living for? What am I thinking about? Yeah, I'm doing work. I gotta make the widgets, or I gotta be the nurse, I gotta be the real estate agent, I gotta be the lawyer, I gotta be the plumber, I gotta be whatever. But as I'm doing that, I'm thinking, well, how am I loving God? How am I glorifying God in what my hands are doing? How am I being used for his purposes? When all of a sudden, no, it's not this right now. It's going to be over here. Are we fighting against that? No, I have this appointment. I've got the schedule. This is what my plan is. No, it's over here. Again, we don't use God to justify irresponsibility or laziness or anything like, oh, I'm not going to go to work today so I can pray to Jesus. Maybe, he might be, but not if I just am trying to be lazy. God doesn't do that. So don't use God as an excuse to not take care of your responsibility, but don't also press against him in pride, saying, I know it's better, God. And it really, that flows from that love, that flows from that relationship, that flows from you being oriented to his purpose. And just in case you doubt me about what that purpose is, I think Paul provides it in 29, just reading 28 again, because you can't hear it enough. And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the likeness of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. So why is God doing all this, all the good and the work and working for the good and putting things all together for those who love him and are called to his purpose? Because, see, as we are participating with God in what he's called us to be, called to his purpose, this is the verse that says this is what God has been doing or has done in terms of putting in this position where we could be there. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. See, we don't have time. We might, we took a service to do one verse. We might get like a half a verse there. And like in terms of the words that are used there, in terms of God's declared purpose, his knowledge, his authority, that there's a lot there in terms of what Paul is saying. But my focus right now is just to talk about, God is declaring the purpose and why he has the purpose. What is God trying to do with us? Again, if the conditions are we love him, God works all things together for good for those who love him. Okay, God, I want to love you. I want to be called to your purpose. Well, what's the purpose? Boom! Conform to the image of his Son. But why? So that he'll be the firstborn among many brothers and sisters. That ultimately, as God saves us, he's almost making a family for Jesus, is what he's saying. Again, not because Jesus needs it. It's not like, John, God, I'm your only son. I don't have any brothers and sisters. But the glory of, again, the relational God. But that's what it says. That Jesus will have brothers and sisters as God is the Father. And we're that. That sound like a good purpose? That could sound like a good reason for living, that we're looking like brothers and sisters of Jesus? So that as we're conformed to that likeness, not only do we have the influence in our lives, not only do we have the peace of life, but we have the ultimate purpose of heaven, that will with him in glory, that Jesus has brothers and sisters, that Jesus has made a family by virtue of his death. And that's the picture Paul is pointing here. So what does this make us? I think it makes us confident people. I think it makes us peaceful people. I think it makes us people that, we're not waiting for the shoe to drop. Have you ever said that? Heard people say that, everything's going good, knock on wood. I'm waiting for the shoe to drop, though. What? Every day is unto itself, and I live it according to God's purpose, and whatever he so does, he does, and whatever he doesn't, he doesn't. And I just love him, and I'm called to his purpose. And confident? Do I fear circumstance? Do I fear people? Do I fear, what could... Nope. Confident in terms of, if I know, I'm convinced. It's intrinsic knowledge that God is that good, that he can bring good out of all things, and all I have to do is love him and call to his purpose. Okay, yeah, doesn't that give me a certain perspective of life? I think it does, and I think the perspective, we're confident people, we're peaceful people. I think we're positive people. I think there's not much to complain about in that verse, amen? There's not much to, I really hate the fact that bitter. I'm really bitter about good things. God's working good things in that. All things. Does that thing you're bitter about, is it amongst the all things? See, the minute it's amongst the all things, it drives our perspective of everything. About, again, what am I expectant about? What am I positive about? I'm giving up what I already said the point. But anyway, I think we become positive people because we're oriented to positive things. Negative things happen, and again, like I said, well, what's God going to do with this? That my God, as I'm suffering this bad thing, is trying to press good in the situation. So I can be positive about how he's working. But let me just love him, so I'm thinking like him. Let me call to his purpose, so I'm doing the things that he wants me to do, and I recognize what he's trying to accomplish in my life. And then I love the expectant people. I just have to say that again. I think it makes us expectant people. Again, we're expecting good. We're expecting God to work. Our eyes are open. God, all things work together. Well, then, like God, and you understand, God's time frame is different from our time frame. You lost your job in one day. It's probably not the way I've seen the way God works. Like maybe 3 months will go by, maybe before you see that purpose being fulfilled. How God, when you think about the orchestration, that effort, and that works things together. You think about all the things that GPS is doing behind the scenes, getting the satellite, getting the street, knowing the street name. How does that happen? But anyways, knowing these side roads in Alabama, but now he knows that. But now working it all together to bring me to the right place. Again, there's a lot of stuff God is doing. And so I think a lot of times when we are called to patience, when we're called to wait for God is working it together. I've always said to my wife that when I thought at 23, 24, when I graduated college, I was ready to be married, I was. She just wasn't. I mean, I'm 7 or 8 years older than my wife, so she would have been like 16 at that time. And so, right, Peter, you were ready, but Karen just wasn't. And so when she got ready, then the 2 plans matched, and boom. But it's the working together. And there was a lot of hard things and struggle, and hard to be single until you're 29. But then all of a sudden, I wouldn't want it any other way. And that, again, that's that's just an example of God working things together I think there is divine purpose in that. It's something that's not really the fact that I'm there and have the 4 children I have in your place. But anyway, but that's kind of how it looks like. But the point I'm making is as God is working it together, as long as it takes, we remain expectant people. When is this going to break? When are you going to show up? When's this going to work? I'm just going to be faithful. I'm just going to love you. I'm just going to be called to your purpose. Whatever you're doing. And we can just be confident of what God promises to us here in Romans 8:28. Let's bow and let's pray. Father, what a priceless verse in terms of just what it assures us of in our lives as believers. Even the directionality of your purpose, what you're trying to accomplish in us. So we have an awareness of what that good is, awareness of what your purpose is as we become inclined to your purpose. And so, Father, I just pray that this would be a great encouragement to our hearts, that it would be a great openness in terms of who you are and what you're doing in our lives. I pray that it would invigorate our relationship with you, that we hear your call to love you in a way that you really deserve and is warranted to love you. I just pray that more and more we would grow into that, and then beyond that, to be taken by your purpose, to be participating with you. I just pray that our lives would be transformed by this very verse in how we perceive our lives, how we engage with you, how we conduct things and perceive things that are happening to us. Just remind us of this verse as we live our lives this week, next month, and help us to be the confident, positive, expectant people you call us to be. It is in your Son, Jesus Christ's name, we do pray.